Hello and welcome to Contractor Outlook newscast from the coffee shops. My name is Heidi Ellsworth, and we are here today with the leading legal expert for contractors across the board. Across the board, and also a tremendous great friend of mine, Trent Cotney. Trent, welcome to Contractor Outlook newscast.
Hi, it's great to see you, and I echo those sentiments. I mean, it's always a pleasure to be able to talk to you, but I definitely consider you one of my closest friends. So glad to be able to talk to you.
Oh, I love it. You and I have worked together for many, many years. And as I think I told you more than once, you're one of the few, I think you're probably the only lawyer who doesn't scare me. So I know when I'm with you, it's safe and you explain things. I can even remember Tim Ellsworth was sitting in one of your presentations. He's like, I understand what Trent's saying. And, he's the guy out there working in the field. And you just do such an amazing job for the contractors out there to really help them. Deal with risk and safety. So let's start with your introduction and talk a little bit about yourself and also about your firm.
Sure. So, Trent Cotney, I am a partner and construction team leader at Adams and Reese. Adams and Reese is a national law firm, almost 400 lawyers, 20 offices, practice coast to coast. I'm in charge of the construction team here. I'm board certified in construction in the state of Florida, licensed in 8 or so other states, and do everything from litigation and disputes to contract drafting and regulation, and advocacy, and everything in between.
Yeah, it's amazing. And you're also general counsel for the National Roofing Contractors Association and so many different associations in HVAC. I mean, it's just amazing the amount of time you give and your team give to the associations.
Yeah, absolutely. So been involved with a lot of, more than a dozen, maybe 2 dozen different associations where I serve as general counsel. And part of the good thing about doing that is not only being able to give back, but also it helps me keep my ear on the ground. Right.
Yeah.
So, and the topics that we're talking about today, I know they are issues because everywhere I go, I don't just sit up in my office here. I'm always on the road just like you are, and
Right.
get to hear about what the issues are. So it makes me better at the job I do. So very appreciative of those rules.
Yeah, we are, yes, we are huge on associations, and they have been really taking the lead, the front, along with you, along with the coffee shops, of really trying to stay intact with what's happening in the administration. So I say we jump right in. We
Sure.
have a semi-new presidential administration. I mean, we're 9 months into it,
Mhm.
maybe close, somewhere in there. And a lot has been happening. So I would love, what kind of changes? I know we picked the day, but what kind of changes have really happened in these last 9 months that are affecting the construction industry?
Yeah, and it can be overwhelming sometimes trying to kind of parse through it. And I think the listeners need to understand that there's a lot of chaos here. But I think some of that chaos is intentional from a tactical standpoint. So
Mhm.
you have to kind of see it for what it is. And I don't get too nervous until I see it start impacting bottom lines, and then I take it a little bit more serious. But there are a couple of big ticket items that I think have really caused my phones to light up, and that would be immigration and trade policy tariffs.
Mhm.
Immigration by far has been the dominant issue in construction, regardless of what trade you're in, right? And the reason is that as an industry we've become even more reliant on foreign labor, both as W-2 and as subcrews 1099s, right? And the current administration has a zero tolerance policy as it relates to immigration, closed borders. Just recently, they've increased H-1Bs by $100,000, made it very difficult for the industry to get legal workers here to help fill our jobs. When you have
Yeah.
that coupled with enhanced deportations and ICE raids and all this other stuff, it has put some significant pressure on labor, right? And I think you and I've kind of talked about it before. One of the things I'm definitely watching is labor rates. I think as our labor pool shrinks, regardless of whether they're you know e-verified and 100% legal, W-2 workers or not, the cost of labor, I think, is going to increase. And I think you're going to see that in both vertical and horizontal construction. So that is something, as we continue to see this level of enforcement, that I think a lot of contractors and trade should be aware of. Um, you know, Talking about a lot of different things, but I'll just keep talking for a while. So the
Yeah, that's
the
good.
the trade and the tariff side of things is also interesting, and there's been a lot of back and forth there. I will say that to date, the only real impact I've seen has been in steel and steel related accessories. But what our listeners need to understand is that tariffs take a while to trickle through the economy. So if I came out today and said, look, the chemicals that are used for, PVC, I'm going to put a 100% tariff on that. It would be months before we really see the ramifications of that, because the way that tariffs work is they're assessed on the import. When it comes into the port, it's assessed, but there's existing inventory, and then each segment of the supply chain, regardless of whether it's the party that receives it, the manufacturer, the distributor, the contractor, or the end user, may make decisions to absorb some of that cost in the short run, right? So we don't know the full extent of the impact of some of these tariffs, and they are constantly changing. So that level of uncertainty has created some issues where I've started suggesting not only addressing it contractually, but also looking to pre-purchase materials, having owners do direct purchases to avoid dealing with it altogether. A lot of the same advice that I was giving post COVID during the material crisis is the same advice
Mhm.
I give now. So interesting times.
Yeah, because I mean, one of the things that I think is going to affect a lot of contractors is with the tariffs changing so many times that you may be purchasing one thing at a higher price and then it changes and now all of a sudden that same item is at a lower price. And that's going to cause fluctuations, like you said, with the vendors, with the manufacturers, through distribution, all of that. And a lot of these folks don't even know yet how, if it is going to, if it's going to change their pricing or not. Some people have just, let it kind of flow through.
Mhm.
But I think that's something that we're going to see down the road. And so having your contracts flexible so that you can talk just a little bit about that, because I know you really give that advice a lot of the times about making sure that you have the right language.
Yeah, regardless of whether you're doing residential, commercial, or industrial, you want a price acceleration provision in your contract to the extent that you can provide a contract to the customer. Sometimes you're in
Yeah.
situations where you're reviewing someone else's contract, and I get it, right? But if you have the capability of controlling some element of that, you want a provision that basically allows for an adjustment if you see an increase, percentage increase. I usually say about 5%. You'll eat the first five. That's fair. But anything over that, you're entitled to an adjustment. You got to be able to show the actual pricing. I've had some recent contracts. I'm working on a very large. It's a $900 million EV plant contract that I've been negotiating, and part of that is we had to create and draft a very specific price acceleration provision that dealt specifically with tariffs and how to track the increased cost based on U.S. customs, website data and other things like that. But it did create a mechanism. And then the one thing I want our listeners to understand is, for those of you that are doing bid work, let's say you're doing local, state, or federal bid work, you may be saying, Trent, this is great, but I don't have any flexibility there. I got to sign whatever contract is given to me, and that's it. And I understand that. But what I do recommend is that through either a request for clarification or a request for information, you reach out to the owner's rep, the design professional, and say, I am concerned about tariffs on this widget, right? On this product, on this material, on whatever, right? If for some reason, this skyrockets, how are we going to address that as a group? And oftentimes you'll get a response say, look, here's a mechanism, that we expect you to bid up to X, but we'll deal with it. Oftentimes it's addressed, or they may just say pound sand, in which case you bid accordingly, right?
Yeah.
The
Right.
key is addressing it on the front end rather than after it happens, because we don't know what's going to happen. I guarantee you, by the time that you and I are off this, there's some other breaking news thing that's going to potentially affect contractors. So that what I encourage everybody is just be safe and be cautious when it comes to bidding and making sure that you're protected contractually.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such great advice. And so let's go to the other one that you mentioned,
Mhm.
with immigration.
Yep.
And you have done some amazing presentations through our coffee conversations, through our read, listen, watch webinars on immigration and what you need to do. But I think a couple of those presentations were 2 to 3, maybe 4 months ago. The year's
Mhm.
going so fast, Trent. What has happened recently? Any big changes or anything people should be aware of?
Yeah, the climate is still very much the same. There's been more targeted action in certain locations that we've seen. Recently spoke down in South Florida, and they're expecting a sweep here pretty soon. So, one of the things that you need to make sure that you're doing, again, prepare. Preparation is key, right? So, in our past, discussions, we've talked about having an SOP, a standard operating procedure, in place for if I shows up to a job site. I think it's very
Right.
important that you continue to train on that and reiterate that, right? You need to understand, you don't want to interfere, but you want to know and assert your rights, and that's the key thing. The other thing is making sure that those resources are available for your employees, right? And there's a right way to do that and a wrong way to do that. And one of the things that everything that I'm saying is based on real world experience. So,
Mhm.
one of the things that I encourage employers to do is offer resources, right? It could be employee rights cards in English and Spanish. It can be a list of employee attorneys that handle immigration issues. It can be, a variety of different things. But the one thing that you don't want to do is single out an employee, right? Say, hey, because you may face a discrimination claim. More importantly, and again, everything that I'm saying is based on real world experience. It is a crime if you knowingly employ someone that is illegal, right?
Right.
So if you are handpicking certain individuals, that can act as evidence that you knowingly employed someone that is illegal. And I can tell you that this is a real world issue. So make sure that's the thing that a lot of people don't understand is, if ICE shows up, you think, okay, well, they're just after these poor people, I'm good. Not necessarily, right? You need to protect yourself and recognize that, in this environment, you as an employer may have exposure beyond just the workers that work for you. You may have some potential criminal exposure. So always recommend you contact counsel as soon as anything like that happens.
Yeah, and I think for everybody who's listening to this, whether you are a construction company, subtrades, whatever you may be, or you're a media group or a distributor or a manufacturer, this applies to everyone. I mean, I know we spent a good amount of time this year just working within our payroll system to make sure all of our I-9s were up to date, everything was in place, and we had no reason except for it's good practice. It's just to make sure that you are ahead of um you talk about this a lot, Trent, and I've really taken it to heart for our business is just mitigating risk. So if you do the prep work ahead, whatever it may be, whether it's contracts, I-9s, e-verify, all of those things, I think it just makes a healthier business.
You mentioned something, and I think I just want to underscore it. This is not isolated to contractors. We had a recent construction manufacturer that was raided and lost 33 employees.
Wow.
So recognize that it's everyone, right?
Yeah.
Distribution, manufacturing, anybody in construction, and construction is one of the key targets, right? So you know, back to risk mitigation, there's really two parts of it, Heidi, and that's what I want our listeners to understand is, you've got to create that standard operating procedure. You've got to figure out a framework that is going to work so that you're not responding based on anxiety or fear. When you respond based on fear, you do stupid things. So the
Mhm.
goal of an SOP, even though you might think it's asinine, the goal of the SOP is to take away that fear and anxiety. It gives you a script to follow, and that is key in a crisis situation. But here's that's the first part. The second part is that in business and in life too, you must be purposeful and consistent with everything that you do. So that goes to I-9s, that goes to onboarding subs, that goes to everything is you follow the same thing over and over again. I'll give you a great example. So at this point in my career, I'm pushing 30 years. I've probably filed 1,000 lien foreclosure complaints. But even to this day, I go back and I look at the standard form to make sure, even though I know I've hit it, I make sure I've hit every single pleading element, right?
Right.
And at this point, I know how to do it, but it is about being purposeful. Routinization, like you want to make it muscle memory so that
Yeah.
you don't do stupid things. Where I see, manufacturers, suppliers, and contractors screw up with this is when they get nervous and they say stuff they shouldn't say. You have the right to counsel, and you should absolutely assert that if ICE shows up, right? It is the kind of thing where you must stay calm. That is the most
Hmm.
critical thing. Business hat on first, then you worry about everything else.
That makes no sense. I mean, one of the things you had said before, simple things like signage. Is your signage? Do you have, no the correct signage so that it's a private or it's you're not there, no trespassing, all those kind of things. You're going to
Yeah.
say it better than I am, but making sure that you're doing all those things ahead of time, and then you don't have to worry as much.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the big things with ICE raids is understanding what type of warrant they have. And typically there's two types of warrants: is an administrative warrant and a judicial warrant. Judicial gives them access the ability to access private property. Administrative is public. So one of the things that you want to do is have that clear signage, restricted access, private property, whatever it might be. That helps prove that an area that they're trying to access, whether it's in a manufacturing plant or at your home office or on a job site, is private property and they need a judicial warrant. That could potentially help you, and it could potentially help your employees if for some reason there's some issues. Because the key thing is, again, never interfere, never tell your workers to run, don't do anything like that. You'll end up in prison. But what you do want to do is object, and I like to have a witness there that can say, look, respectfully, I've looked at your warrant. This is not signed by a judge. You don't have the ability to access the space. I'm objecting, right? And
Yeah.
that's key because that can come up later.
Yeah, because there, I'm sure there are cases going through the courts right now on all of this.
Yeah. Again, nothing that I say is hypothetical. So I'll leave it at that.
It's all happening.
Right.
I want to talk just real quick while we're talking about labor. I want to talk about, if you're watching the news, you're hearing about the jobs reports, you're hearing about different things coming out of the Department of Labor or not coming out in statistics, things changing. That has caused some uncertainty, I think, also for contractors out there as they're looking at it and trying to do their 2026 planning and putting everything together. What are some of the things you're seeing around that?
Yeah. And I kind of said this at the onset. It's hard. I recognize, that a lot of what is being done is keeping the plate spinning, and a lot of it is chaos for chaos sake, right? There's some tactical element to what's going on. And to be frank, we've never seen anything like it, right?
No. Yeah.
Um, so from a business perspective, right? From a business perspective, what I would do is I would look at backlog, right? I would look at your key performance indicators, and I would focus on that more than I would the news cycle, because there's a lot of stuff that's thrown out there. Some of it never comes to fruition. Some of it's reversed. That to me is a bigger indicator. I will say, again, like you, all over the U.S., uh, backlog isn't what it was even this time last
Right.
year.
Yep.
Down in South Florida, they're soft right now. Pacific
Hmm.
Northwest, soft.
Soft.
I've been up pretty much everywhere. It's not necessarily what it was. Is that a sign of the times? Don't know. It could just be we haven't had a lot of storms or whatever it might be. But what I recommend is, running a business is running a business. So all you can do is control what's in front of you. Look at your KPIs, your key performance indicators. Make sure that you understand your cash flow, your AR. I have talked about this so many times. I was just on a call right before we got on here. When I was telling a contractor, I was like, you have to have diligence when it comes to your AR. Like it is when times are good and that money's flowing in, you don't see the cracks in your business. It's only when that
Right.
money dries up is where you start to see, oh, I don't have good AR practices. I'm not on this, right?
Right.
So, if I think what I'm trying to say through that long-winded, speech there is that if you focus on the business basics of running your business, of really trying to make it successful, to a certain extent, it's important to understand what's going on in the news, right? But there's also, it helps you focus on what's important, because if you just focused on the news, the sky's falling. And I
Right.
tend to, I just put my head down, and until something pops me in the head and says, "Hey, I got an issue here," then it's just business as usual. That's kind of how I would look.
That is exactly how we are too. And I know there's a lot of contractors that way too, who are just really right now focusing on their business, on sound business practices, and relationships with their customers. Those relationships and helping their customers and understanding what they're going through too. And that's kind of where we're at. I think that I just think that's so important because you can't control so much that's happening right now. So going on I mean, there's just so many topics, but let's talk just a little bit because this whole thing is on what things have been happening with administration, good and bad. But one of them that there is always a lot of chatter around are federal regulations. So
Mhm.
OSHA, Department of Labor, all the regulations, EPA. What things out there would you highlight?
Yeah, I think one of the pluses of the administration is that it has been somewhat deregulatory, right? I think that in a lot of ways, a lot of the regulations that could have potentially impacted contractors have diminished. I think there's other regulations now that you might have to deal with, but in a lot of ways, I think it's been a positive. I think there's still a little bit of uncertainty there. I'll give a great example, like the OSHA heat injury and illness rule. That was promulgated under the Biden administration. It was still going through rulemaking. I've sat on probably a dozen stakeholder meetings. I was just on, some other committee meetings here recently. It's still going through the process, but the latest I've heard is, and this is coming from a pretty good source, is that the White House may end up ultimately repealing it, even if it does come to fruition. So don't know what will happen there, right? But I can
Yeah.
tell you overall, there's a deregulatory environment, and that tends to be a positive for contractors because less regulation, is less admin cost, less concerns over that kind of thing. The one thing I'll say is a state can always be more restrictive than the federal government. So, if, California, for example, doesn't matter what the federal government does, California is going to be business as usual. So
Yeah.
even if the administration says we're getting rid of every regulation there is, it doesn't matter because there's a state equivalent in California. I'm picking on California, but there's plenty of
Right.
other states that are just like it. So obviously check with your state, but I think that is sort of a positive that I see as it relates to construction because we were heavy on the regulation side, before, and I think this is probably a good thing.
Yeah, make help that out. Okay, well, on that line, so much chatter around the big bill,
Yeah,
and good and not so good because our solar friends out there, our contractors who are in the solar world, are definitely feeling the hit on that.
right.
Um, what are some of the things that you're seeing around kind of the fallout from after that bill passed?
Yeah, the one big beautiful bill had, it's a lot. It's 1,000 pages. I've digested as much as I can, but Heidi, as you know, I got to count on my fingers. So typically, I defer to the tax specialist when it comes to this. But the things that were on the press were no tax on tips and no tax on overtime. And the overtime thing may be a benefit to contractors and suppliers and manufacturers, but there's a phase out there, right? The things that aren't talked about as much, and we actually spoke about it on one of our podcasts here recently,
Hmm.
is there's a lot of changes, especially in the commercial front, for how you go to market. So a lot of the things that you mentioned, the Inflation Reduction Act credits as it relates to solar and renewable energy, a lot of the Section 179 and 179D, there are changes to that. There are potential phase outs. There are a lot of other issues that relate to that. So my advice is there are some tax benefits, right? There's 100% depreciation on certain equipment purchases. There is, a lot of the things that may help you from a personal standpoint as far as your tax bracket. Definitely, if you're listening to anything, consult with your accountant, consult with your CPA on both your business taxes and your personal taxes because there's probably some things that you can take advantage of. this year. I do think it is tough for solar. Solar was already in a tough place, with some of the issues with financing and other things that were out there. But again, as I said in the previous conversation, keep in mind states can still offer a variety of
Right.
incentives, right? So going back to California, there's a ton of still incentives to have solar, and I think there's some a lot of different benefits that can still be out there. So it's not dead. It's just you've got to understand the game and figure out how to play it.
Yeah, we just had some great conversations about that too. Is that in Texas, solar is actually being driven by demand because they don't want to have to um, rely on the grid
Yeah.
because of some of the big failures that they had
Oh
in
yeah.
Texas. So incentives really aren't playing that much of a role there because people just want it.
And the other thing, Heidi, is that technology's gotten so much better. It's not. This isn't your solar from the '80s anymore, right?
Right,
This
exactly.
is, and the integrated products that are out there. I mean, there's a lot of really great solar products, and that's only going to continue to get better. So I think
Yeah.
there is an opportunity for significant energy savings, especially if you're in places like the Dallas area that has some issues with their grid. Definitely worth looking at.
And the other thing that I've been seeing along those lines also is that, there is still a push by major corporations to for zero or reduction of carbon.
Mhm.
There is for the ROI of the roofs, they want the roofs actually paying back, whether that's through, being able to use them, um, solar, green roofs, stormwater, those kind of things. So even though the 179 and some of those other, tax benefits aren't there anymore, I think contractors really looking at what are these corporations caring about, right? Are they caring about it? And they are. There's a number of them. We've had some great podcasts on that have made a big difference. So, some of the things that have come out have been, especially out of the big bill, is exciting was what they did for CTE. And, NRCA, we have been advocating at Roofing Day for this for a number of years, and there's definitely some great things coming out that way. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So, that's a big positive. You and I have both been advocates of, workforce development since inception. And it's nice to see that people are starting to understand that college isn't the only route anymore, right? There's a lot of opportunity to get into the trades, and you're seeing a lot of, CTE assistance that was not only put in that bill, but also promulgated by various states. So, one of the things I thought was really interesting in the bill was you can now use 529 and other type savings programs to pay for that kind of training. So even if you're not going to college, you can use a 529 plan for that. It's just I think that the mindset has changed. It's finally changed. I think people are starting to see that the career in the trades is valuable, and it is not going to be as impacted by AI as some of the college majors are. So it'll be interesting to see. I think this is only going to continue. I think there's value in trades. I always have, and it's nice to see that the government is starting to support what you know we've been saying for a long time, what National Women in Roofing has been saying, NRCA, and a lot of the other associations out there. So
Yeah, it is. It's exciting. And because it
yeah,
really needs to be, and parents need to be able to have that same choice of, helping their kids when they're going to vocational schools to be able to save for that, to be able to use those funds. It only makes sense. And so, I'm sure a lot of people know, but along with obviously helping thousands and thousands of contractors throughout construction. Legally, you are also a lobbyist. You're involved across the board that way. What's some of your advice to contractors who want to get involved and have their voice heard? I mean, we have some contractors who are very involved on the state levels who are doing a lot. What are some of the things you're seeing, and how can people get more involved?
yeah, absolutely. So yes, in my past life, I served as a lobbyist, still very advocate, policy wise. I think it's very important to be active, right? To be engaged. And there's a point when everybody sort of comes into your own, right? When you start off, you're worried about making money, keeping the lights on, providing for your family. But then you start thinking, hey, I've got all this knowledge. Let me see what good I can do. So a lot of different ways you can get involved. It's as simple as, knowing your local representative and senator, on a federal level and on a state level, right? Or local level. Getting involved with associations is a great way to do it because they act as sort of a mouthpiece for everyone out there. It's a focal point, right? So, get with your local, regional, and national associations because each of them more than likely have an advocacy or lobbying arm, and let your voice be heard. I think it's
Yeah.
important to speak, and to speak intelligently, right? To come
Hmm.
from to not just identify a problem, but identify a solution. That's the key thing is, hey, I got this issue. What can I do to potentially correct it? But big believer in that. I think it is almost a responsibility that we have to make sure our voices are heard and that we're doing our best to affect positive change in the construction industry.
Yeah, I do too. We go to roofing day every
Mhm.
year. We're
Yeah.
involved now on some of the state level, just supporting and promoting the roofing days that are going on there. So, whatever trade you're in, whether you're a general contractor, with your roofing, siding, concrete, you name it, all of the things that metal, you're going to have associations who are doing this. And so, don't feel like you just have to go it alone. Get involved with your association, and they can help you have a voice and get educated on the really what is going to affect your business. And I can tell you over the last, I don't know how many years, we've been doing it since 2018, I believe, Roofing Day in DC. We have seen a number of our initiatives pass, like the
Mhm.
CTE and different programs that really have helped the industry overall and in society. It's not just about the industry; it's about doing the right things. So,
Yeah.
Trent, as always, thank you. Such great information, keeping us up to date on what's going on because boy, it is changing fast. And so we'll have to do this again and get caught up.
Yeah, absolutely. And for everybody listening out there, I get my news from Roofer's Coffee Shop and the other coffee shops that are out there. If I want to know what's going on, that's the first place that pops up on my feed. So I encourage everybody that's listening, make sure that you're, tagging them on social, that you're getting that stuff because that's where I get my news first.
Wow. Thank you, Trent.
Mhm.
Thank you. We try. It's all really good. Thank you so much. And for everybody listening, please check out the directory for Adams and Reese. You'll find Trent in that directory and on all the coffee shops. And also, Trent is an influencer for us on Roofers Coffee Shop, so you can find his bio and also speaking bio on our Speakers Bureau. So just type in the word Trent, and you'll be amazed at all the great articles and everything that he has done on the coffee shop. So, once again, Trent, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you all for listening. Please check out all of our Contractor Outlook newscasts on YouTube and also on your favorite podcast channel. Be sure to subscribe and set those notifications. We will be back again every month with information that helps the construction industry overall. Have a great day, and we'll be seeing you soon.